If you're just joining us, the presentation will begin momentarily. We're just letting everybody log in. If you're just joining us, the presentation will begin shortly. We're just giving everyone a moment to log in. Thank you. Okay, I think we can start. We've got quite a few people logged in. All right. Good afternoon and welcome to Re-engage in Trade, Navigating the Storm of Global Logistics. My name is Stella Sheehan and I'm the Deputy Director here at the World Trade Center. I want to thank you all for joining us today for what is a very timely topic, and judging by the level of interest, a very important topic for companies at the moment as they navigate the logistics strategy going forward and try to mitigate risk. Just before we begin, just a few housekeeping rules. So you will be muted for the duration of the program. If you wish to ask any questions, please do so via the Q&A at the bottom, and we will get to those questions at the end of the formal presentation. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our Executive Director, Mr. Tim Nowak. Tim has led the World Trade Center for just over 13 years now, and actually I think he started in October, so happy work anniversary, Tim. It's literally been 13 years. In former lives, he worked extensively in international markets spanning the globe. A native St. Louisan, he is a proud Mizzou grad, just like our speaker today, and also a 2014 Eisenhower Fellow. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that today is Bosses Day. So happy Bosses Day to one of the best, Tim. Over to you.
Oh, thank you, Stella. Thank you very much. And yes, I really appreciate the shout out to Mizzou. I was going to say the same thing, Caitlin. You know, at the World Trade Center St. Louis, we have a 20-year plus history of a competitive and successful internship program for college seniors from around the region. These former interns now lead programs at companies like Boeing and Bayer and Millipore Sigma. However, few have flown as high and as far as our speaker today, Caitlin Murphy. Back in 2008 and 2009, Caitlin, after returning from a China studies program at Peking University, Caitlin worked with us and many regional partners, regional economic development partners, on what was then the China Hub Initiative. We are very grateful for the work that Caitlin provided back then. In fact, just this morning, Caitlin, a few of us here in the office were sharing stories and reminiscing of your work back then, even sharing a few photos. And we've all agreed at the office, you literally do not age. I don't know how that works, but there's something to that. But now Caitlin has moved on, obviously, and she is the founder of Global Gateway Logistics based in St. Louis, Missouri. As Stella had mentioned, she is a proud grad of the University of Missouri-Columbia, as am I. obtaining a degree in international business with an emphasis in Mandarin. Caitlin has held a number of positions in international logistics over the past decade. In 2017, she came to the realization that the industry needed change. In her eyes, companies should demand more strategy and more transparency in a rapidly changing global economy. This was the beginning of Global Gateway Logistics, a new and innovative international freight forwarding and logistics company. Global Gateway's mission is to strengthen global and domestic supply chains by reducing freight transportation costs, strengthening processes, and expanding trade tools. Their services include international air and ocean shipping, ground transportation, warehousing, and project logistics. Caitlin is determined to simplify the global logistics industry through customer service and technology. Recently, Global Trade magazine listed her company as a top 50 third-party logistics firm. They were also featured in the news for focusing operations in early 2020 in the pandemic to deliver over 2 million pieces of PPE to the St. Louis area. And I should note, Caitlin was instrumental in our office and the St. Louis Nanjing Sister City Committee in connecting and facilitating a shipment of 30,000 donated PPE to the city and county of St. Louis. And so we're really grateful for that. Caitlin was able to utilize her relationships overseas to locate product, find space on aircrafts, clear customs, and expedite delivery. And in the process, she herself and her company donated more than 10,000 masks to local St. Louis not-for-profits and small businesses. So she has done a tremendous amount of work. We really are grateful for having known you now for more than 10 years. And we're so proud of you and the work that you're doing. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you now for your presentation. Thanks, Caitlin.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know that another Zoom call can be a little bit tiring, especially on a Friday, but I promise we'll talk about some pertinent subjects and hopefully give you some tips to walk away from. So without further ado, I am going to share this presentation. Give me one moment. Okay, so we're going to talk today about the storm that global logistics is in right now, how to navigate through it, and leave you with some tips as well that you can bring into your firm's supply chains. So a little bit about Global Gateway Logistics. As Tim mentioned, we are an international freight forwarder, an NVOCC, which is a non-vessel operating common carrier. We're an intermediary, so we arrange transportation services such as ocean, air, rail, and road. We don't actually own any of the equipment. We have an ample amount of carrier relationships. A freight forwarder also assists with domestic and foreign customs clearance and documentation compliance through trade partners. And so today we're going to talk about the effects that COVID-19 have had on the logistics market. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to mitigate some of those effects on global supply chains. We're going to be talking about what I think are the top 3 effects that COVID-19 has had on the logistics industry. And then the top 3 strategies I think that coincide with those effects. And I do want to note, the extent of disruption, it definitely varies. We've seen that it varies by commodity, by trade lane, by mode of transport. Some companies that do a lot of domestic trade, so their main form of transportation is trucking, they haven't had as much of an effect on their logistics as a lot of these firms that either purchase their raw material overseas or export their product to overseas customers. I know that, trucking was an extremely critical mode of transport during the height of the pandemic. In the first couple of quarters of this year. I know that we are so grateful, the 2 million pieces of PPE that Tim mentioned, we really had to jump a lot of hurdles, both overseas in China as well as here. And we're so grateful. We saw firsthand how a lot of these domestic trucking carriers cared so much about, driving through the night, working overnight to unload aircrafts that came in with things like that. So we're definitely seeing that every mode of transportation has been affected. And really, most countries around the world in early 2020 shut down their borders, as everybody knows, and it severely limited transportation, both of people and of goods. And what was really shocking, I think that we all had predicted, but the numbers kind of came out with the UN developing a lot of really core reports that are available to the public, but there was a 27% year-on-year fall over global trade. And there's been major reductions in container shipping, starting in really, I guess it was February, we started to see a lot of these carriers enact blank sailings, GRIs, which are general rate increases. The airline industry has, the pandemic really wreaked havoc over everything in that industry. What we saw was, out of the pool of carriers, air carriers that we were able to use for imports and exports, it dropped down significantly. So for instance, maybe in one specific trade lane from port to port, there might be weekly sailings or weekly traffic, and it would turn out that, there would be one aircraft that would leave from that port once a week. And so what happened was, it was this snowball effect where everybody's trying to get their cargo onto the same plane. And there was this monopoly really over pricing, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit later. As I mentioned, the trucking industry has definitely had its challenges due to volume, but it's been a little bit less chaotic only because most of the goods that are going truck here are domestic within the United States. And rail has had extreme effects as well. There's, due to a severe port congestion, which we'll talk about, the rail industry is experiencing daily issues with containers being delayed and not having the equipment they need. So I love this chart because, although there's more than one mode of transport, 80% of the world's goods that are traded globally ship via ocean. And so I always say that data is the best tool we can use for predictability. And, it's really shocking just to see this chart and really see that there's been severe dips in just the port callings. So that means, the port callings are essentially the steamship lines such as Maersk or Hyundai. It's the amount of port calls that they would have in any given week. And so we'll talk a little bit about blank sailings, but that's essentially when the ship doesn't sail, they don't make a port call. So this was a really good a data range to kind of see a bigger overall picture of it. And then the other thing I always like to look at is container rates. I think there's a lot to be said about studying historical ocean freight rates as well as predictive markets. There are a few predictive markets out there for ocean freight rates. And as you can see, the rates are continuously climbing. Actually, this chart stops off in July. I wish it would keep going. I couldn't find a more current chart. But really what we're experiencing is, even with most of our clients, the rates have almost doubled in some trade lanes. We do a lot of trade between China and the US, or I'm sorry, a lot of logistics for trade between China and the US. And what we've seen is that, given the same time in the previous year, most of our customers would end up, roughly around where you're seeing this blue line, where you're seeing the bottom blue line, they would be about between $1,500 to $1,800 per 40-foot container from Shanghai to Long Beach. And now it's almost right now above, it's definitely above 3,000, almost around 3,500. Which is really gut-wrenching for a freight forwarder, especially when our main goal is to really reduce those transportation costs, especially during the time of COVID, where I think there's been so many unforeseen costs and other aspects of business that we're even more finely tuned looking at logistics costs for clients to try to understand where we can lower the rates if at all possible. But we'll talk a little bit later too about how it's been challenging to do that with carriers. But this was a good chart I wanted to show you guys just on actual rates. And then hidden cost. I would say this is probably without a doubt one of the toughest things that logistics is experiencing right now due to the pandemic. There's hidden costs that are connected to a lot of things. I think one of the biggest modes of transport being hit with hidden cost is ocean freight. There's been severe container shortages in Asia. And what happens is, again, like everyone's fighting to get their cargo on one aircraft, now everybody, importers and exporters, are fighting to get that container. And so it's a really, really tough domino effect, because if importers and exporters are unable to get container drops when they need them at their facilities, it really delays their exports and imports. It delays the vessel sailing that they've planned. It delays when their customers are going to receive the product. So that's been a major issue, is the container shortage. And then what happens too is now the carriers are essentially enacting these premium surcharges for containers. So like any type of good that's really been restricted and the quantity is much lower, they can charge more for it because people will pay for it. And so it's been really tough to really swallow those surcharges, and on top of rising ocean freight costs. And I want to give you a good case study on this next point, that some receivers are being hit with serious detention and demurrage costs, as well as airline warehouse storage. Airlines affected as well with this. But we had a customer that was importing finished goods from China, and due to COVID, their product was delayed. It finally the manufacturing in China finally restarted earlier in 2020, about January, and they had about 25 full containers of product that they were rushing to ship out because it was delayed getting to their end customer. And it was a really interesting case because the warehouse in California that we were delivering these containers to said, well, wait a minute, we don't have enough staff to unload these containers in enough time to return the container to the port before the last free day, in which if you don't do it, you get hit with things like detention, and it's a per day charge per container. So you can see how it can quickly add up. And so unfortunately for this warehouse, the state of California at that time had laid some pretty heavy restrictions down on how many people were able to be staffed with social distancing and all of that. So this led to the containers being extremely delayed, being unloaded, and it ended up being a $50,000 fine. And I don't know about anybody on this call, but I know, most of my clients can't stomach a $50,000 fine. And so, I really had to sit back and say, how do we strategize this? How can we get out of it? And granted, everybody immediately goes to insurance. And I think one thing the pandemic's taught us is, insurance doesn't cover all. And it was true. Insurance actually, in this case, did not cover this. So I really went to work with relationships and networks, and I had reached out to a lot of our steamship line partners, and it had turned out, a lot of what we found is that a lot of these steamship lines were having this same problem across the globe. And so it's a case-by-case basis, and we'll talk about a little bit about this when we get to solutions, but just know that a lot of these steamship line carriers, they do enact a case-by-case basis on waiving some of these detention and demurrage fees due to issues caused by the pandemic. And then the last note I want to talk about is a lot of the chargers from carriers are deemed appropriate. The FMC, or the Federal Maritime Commission, they've come out, there's a lot of rulings on it, and a lot of these fees are appropriate for the carriers to bill to the freight forwarder, who generally bills to the importer or exporter. There's also been severe shipping delays, not only due to container shortage, but there were severe issues in the beginning of the pandemic where nothing was shipping out of either overseas for imports or here in the United States. Most manufacturing was shut down for a while, so nothing was getting exported. So you had this disruption on the normal weekly sailing schedules as well as aircraft schedules, which led to now what we're seeing as this domino or snowball effect, where now everything is back up and running for the most part, but what's happening is there's severe port and rail congestion. We have a customer here in St. Louis that imports their cargo on the West Coast, and it gets railed to the St. Louis terminal. And this specific container sat at the port for almost 2 weeks, and then sat another week waiting to be loaded on the rail, simply because the rail is so congested and so behind of their weekly schedules that it really ends up creating a massive delay for the end customer. Drivers are also missing appointments due to congestion, because mainly it's because of there's a nationwide chassis shortage. And chassis are essentially the equipment that containers sit upon, that's connected to a driver's equipment. And so because of this nationwide chassis shortage, drivers are having a really hard time getting chassis where they used to. They're being turned away from a lot of ports around the US if they don't bring the chassis with them, which then just delays the container leaving the port, which then ends up potentially being caused demurrage for that importer or exporter. And then for exporters, I've been reading a lot, and we have a lot of connections in the agriculture industry that I seek to just understand and educate myself more about the experiences that agriculture exporters are going through. And a lot of them have said that the issue that they're running into right now is they'll load up their containers either at a transloader or at their site, and it gets on the rail, it's headed to the export port, and all of a sudden the vessel changes schedule. So instead of sailing out in 5 days, they say, well, this might not sail out now for 12 days, or we're rolling is what the term is. We're rolling this container to the next sailing. And it's tough because at that point, exporters essentially have to decide, do you warehouse that container at the port? A lot of exporters don't have those networks and relationships with warehouses around the country. And so it ends up being this really tough challenge to quickly retroactively try to find temporary storage space, or sit on the phone for hours trying to figure out if your container is going to be hit with any sort of port fees for sitting at the port for so long. And then, of course, the good old trade war, which is not news to anybody at this point, but I was really focused on how we can talk about how the pandemic has affected the trade war, which has an effect on logistics then. And so, through my research and really talking with a lot of industry experts, As you know, US companies have been the hardest hit, paying most of those tariffs. It really is a tough pill to swallow for us, having to see the 25% tariff on our customers' invoices. And, I think it's really a disheartening question when a client of ours comes to us and says, is there anything we can do? And it is, it's really tough to answer that, because the easy answer is you can't, but, there are powers that be that, are working to really try to mitigate some of the costs of the tariffs that US companies have had to harbor. But, it's also led to a lot of things like reduction in profit margins, layoffs, pay decreases, and then higher costs of product to the end customer. And one thing I found really interesting that the pandemic had an effect on with the trade war is I know that there had been some decision-making done on really finalizing this and ending this trade war. And a lot of that had to do with China purchasing US product. They had agreed to a specific amount of purchasing US product by a specific date. I want to say it was September of this year. I could be wrong, but as you can tell, with manufacturing almost completely stopped in March and April and some into May, it really severely disrupts how much product they're able to buy. And so essentially what's happened is if you look at some of the graphs, like you'll see that the amount that China has purchased to date falls far below what it should be to meet this provision of the agreement. And then this is just a great chart on China and US tariffs, because not only are we importers hit with US tariffs, exporters are and importers in China are also hit with tariffs. And so this just kind of shows side by side through the trade war what these tariffs have been for both sides. And a little thing about me, I love Winston Churchill. I think I love his wisdom. And so I love this quote of his. It's part of our company mission. We believe in continuous effort, not strength or intelligence, to unlocking potential. And I really truly feel that in order to rise above the damage that the pandemic has done on global logistics, it's going to take continuous effort of all parties in logistics. So now we're going to kind of talk about some solutions for you guys that I really try to think out of the box on some of these and not just give you some basics that are sort of lower hanging fruit, but really dive into some of the things that we've been advising some of our customers lately. One thing I think is really important that we've actually assisted with some of our customers is exploring alternative sourcing and production. I have to plug the World Trade Center here because I think they are a phenomenal resource and a really strong partner if you're looking to identify what markets, and this goes both for sourcing as well as selling, just remember that. But they're able to help you find the right partners, the right marketing plans. They have a plethora of programs available to really help identify these international markets and break down all the silos to really get you the data and the information that you need. And so, at least with unforeseen, with politics, what that is going to bring to the table, I do think that it's always important to explore alternative sourcing. I will say, I think that researching and comparing alternative domestic and foreign ports is really important. If you currently do this within your supply chain analytics, I would say my advice would actually be start, if you're importing or exporting via the East or the West Coast, really start to look at some other options. I think as well, East Coast is the same. I will tell you, I think the majority of congestion is from the West Coast. And then one thing we always do is say, consider equipment changes. Since equipment is really tough to come by right now, sometimes it does make more sense to really look into strategizing load planning into a 45-foot container. So we've had customers as well that have saved, you know, anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 or more, just switching from 40 to 45-foot containers. So it's always something to look into. And then I cannot stress enough how important the details are right now in everything that you do, in your quotes from your freight forwarders, in your contracts, in your bids. If any companies do annual bids, pay attention to the details. They're going to be even more important in 2021. I don't like to hear the word no a lot. And so when we do get a fee from a carrier that's unexpected, before we'll ever even bring it to clients, what we first do is negotiate with the steamship line. Always make sure your trade partners are doing this as well. It doesn't hurt to ask, you know, even if they say no, we can't provide any sort of waiver on this right now. It doesn't hurt to ask, and it just shows that, you know, your logistics partners are being proactive with their relationships and really trying to guard your bottom line when it comes to logistics. And then Incoterms, it's kind of it can be a really scary, like, Pandora's box that a lot of importers and exporters are nervous to open, and then they either use the Incoterm that their foreign partners are advising, or they use one that they've used for the past 10 years. And I actually had the privilege of attending the World Trade Center St. Louis. It was last year, I believe. It was the session on Incoterms 2020, and it was held by one of the authors of Incoterms. If you have any questions about Incoterms, I will say the World Trade Center is a great source as well to provide you with a lot of the materials and put you in touch with the experts that really can dive into your specific Incoterms. In terms of logistics, Incoterms is really important because it's going to first and foremost decide who's liable for what. And as I was talking about the detention and the demurrage fees, a lot of that is depicted upon who's responsible for what when the chosen Incoterms at play. So I really say just kind of make sure you're running all scenarios that you can, which brings me to you know, set the correct benchmarks, you know, run scenarios, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, but you know, the general rate increases have been all over the map right now on ocean freight, and what they are is they're a rate that steamship lines can implement, and essentially I think we're not going to be seeing an end to GRIs anytime soon, just given the amount that the maritime industry was hit because of COVID. It does personally worry me that GRIs are going to be around for a while. I know that there has been a little bit of government intervention. China actually just met with, I think, the top 5 steamship lines in that call on China ports, and really ask them, they can't force them, but ask them to maintain rates, to really stabilize ocean rates so that we're not going to continuously be seeing the rates going up and up and up. And then, and I would just say with this too, look at what your firm's been paying for any transportation. Take 2020 as a great tool to really correct your benchmark. So if you had been benchmarking that your particular container from St. Louis to Ho Chi Minh was $1,800 a 40 foot in 2019, but now it's averaging, you know, $3,200. Make sure that that's included in your benchmarks for your freight budget in 2021. And that's why I love so much this Price is Right visual. I almost feel like the ocean pricing market and the air pricing market for that as well is kind of like playing a game of Plinko where you drop the disc and you have no idea what it's going to come up with. You could be paying $500 more, $1,000 more, $10,000 more for air. That's definitely something that that we saw. And so pricing is going to be extremely important at this stage. It's been the most volatile pricing market that I've seen. And I think you really can use this, though, to plan ahead and mitigate the future pricing disruptions. Two things we always bring up with our customers. It's not really well marketed around the logistics industry, but there's something called NRAs and NSAs. And NRAs are negotiated rate agreements, and NSAs are negotiated service agreements. This is what an NVOCC is for, and just note that most freight forwarders do have an NVOCC designation as well, or a license, which allows them to go direct to a steamship line and create a contract on your behalf. I think NRAs and NSAs could be a really important aspect in 2021. What they do, usually the contracts, they'll start opening contract rates up in the first quarter of each year. And then they usually like to finalize everything by May, at least the carriers we work with do. I definitely think that NRAs can be a really unique tool. What it is it essentially is a simple rate agreement for your freight. So you will say, we will ship a certain amount of volume, and then the carrier will say, we'll give you this rate for this volume for this trade lane. It doesn't mean that you can't use the spot market. A lot of freight forwarders and WTCs will advise you the same. It just is definitely something where if you are a shipper that does a lot of volume, it's definitely something I think that is worth looking into. And you can discuss it with your freight forwarder and MVOCC. And really, it's your opportunity to kind of throw out your target market. So once you've figured out what your benchmark should be for 2021, that is something you absolutely want to share. We always tell our clients, give us as much data behind your logistics pricing models as possible. And then stress test your transportation budget. I think every transportation budget has been tested this year, it just so happens that you're naturally being stress tested. And like I said, usually the ocean freight market kind of goes through seasons. Annual peak seasons tend to be, around August and October, or August through October for ocean freight. And air freight's usually November to early December. An interesting note on that is anytime Apple releases a new iPhone out of China, you can almost bet that the rates are going to go higher per kilo for any air freight exports. And space will be difficult as well. Plan your budgets accordingly. I would say, if you would ask me by how much, what we've been just out of the data, looking at some of the trends, it's about 40 to 50% higher right now than what someone was paying in 2019 for the same trade lane and the same equipment. So definitely look into that. And then really, really hone in on what we call relationship logistics. We could not do what we do every day without this overall network that supports us. We have freight forwarders that in every single country around the world that we're partnered with that give us a peek into every ounce of government relations, of customs protocols. We are constantly seeking out information with US government entities, especially when it came to early this year when we really tried to navigate the importation of much needed PPE. We worked hand in hand with the FDA because everything was changing overnight. But it's also the sellers, the buyers, the suppliers, and people that work at these terminals that can all come together and share data and share information to really help enhance global trade. And so, you know, I think every part of the logistics environment has somebody that is bringing their own expertise to the table. And definitely use that. I mean, use this time to ask your logistics teams to put together, you know, a state of the union call on your logistics and bringing in, you know, your customs broker, your freight forwarder, your warehouse, your overseas purchaser or seller, and really make sure that everybody has, you know, a level playing field with information, and that transparency is first and foremost. And so, you know, I really hope that you understand that this hopefully is a temporary hindering of the pandemic on global logistics. I do see a lot of glimmers of hope. I see a lot of collaboration. One thing I haven't mentioned in the slides that I think is a really important aspect and one that we invest in is technology. Right now, there is extreme effort to advance technology in global trade and logistics. And so don't be afraid to, you know, collaborate with your freight forwarders and say, you know, here's something that we really would like to see within your technology. Because the more information that you have about your logistics, the stronger that your global supply chain can be. So now I am going to open it up to some questions.
Thank you, Caitlin. That was a wonderful presentation. I loved the idea of using 2020 to correct your benchmark and stress test your transportation budget. I think that's good advice.
Sure.
So thank you so much for the practical hints as well, and the GRIs, and the importance really of formulating a strategy for logistics going forward. I think that'll be very helpful to folks. So the chat has been quite busy. We have quite a few questions. We will do our best to get to as many of them as we can here. So let's just begin. Okay, so first one here, let me just pull this up. As a result of COVID, we keep hearing about the seismic impending shift of supply chains and reshoring or nearshoring to North America. Have you witnessed this shift from Asia, and where do you see the industry going long term?
We have not, as of yet, and not to say that we won't, but we so far have not. And I'm just speaking on behalf of the clients and the commodities that we manage. I do think that it is becoming ever more important to a lot of domestic U.S. companies to look into those options, nearshoring and offshoring. I definitely think we've yet to sort of see the impact of it yet. I do think 2021 is going to really prove to be an interesting year for nearshoring and offshoring.
Great, thank you. Maybe once oh goodness. Perhaps once companies have had a chance, as you said earlier, to stress test that transportation budget, they may look at ulterior options.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Let's see. Got another one here. How has your ability to speak Mandarin affected your work in China on behalf of your clients?
It's been amazing. I want to tell a fun story on that. So we have a customer that came to us, gosh, about 3 years ago and said, you know, I don't have a direct relationship with my manufacturer. I'm working with an overseas broker who's found this manufacturer for me, but I'm not getting the transparency I need on my supply chain. And I really want to develop a direct relationship. But I don't know how to find this person. And so, you know, as we were looking for alternative sourcing for him through our partners in Asia, he came to me with a little slip that happened to be in the very last container that was shipped from that manufacturer. And I translated that slip in Mandarin, and we located the manufacturer, who was just as eager to have a direct relationship with my customer as well. And so it was really fun because, you know, we've been able to kind of set that deal in motion. And we only did it so much that we started the introduction, and then we essentially bowed out and let him take the reins from it. But I loved that, you know, our dedication to not having language barriers really helped drive that down. We actually have a team member here that speaks fluent Vietnamese. And, you know, it's a really exciting thing because there's always something in logistics that comes up. When we were helping with the importation of PPE, I had to do a lot of compliance checking with FDA lab reports that had to be submitted to the FDA on the efficacy of a particular mask. Well, these lab reports were completely in Mandarin. And most of these suppliers did not have the ability to translate it into English. And when they did, you're finding that just computers don't know how to, it's not yet there, I should say. And so it was really unique and interesting to see the lab reports in Mandarin and be able to translate those into English for our customers that we were importing PPE for. So it's definitely been a great tool. It's always something I've used. I am sad that I couldn't go to China this year. I usually go quite often, and I wholeheartedly believe in their concept of guanxi, which I was talking to Stella about, just a mutual respect of business. And so by being able to speak the language, I think it shows just, you know, this mutual respect I have for doing business every day with them.
Absolutely, I would agree. As from one linguist to another, I did not study Mandarin, but French and Italian, and yes, it certainly lends that element of commitment, I think, as well to the country that you're doing business with. So that's wonderful. All right, let's move on. Let's see here. You mentioned how the pandemic affected China's ability to buy as many US goods as they had agreed to. How will the election affect this specific aspect of the trade war?
It's going to be interesting. I'm really focused on reading as much as possible and educating ourselves so we can proactively educate our customers. But, you know, I think regardless of the outcome, there's going to be a serious effect on global logistics and global trade, of course. That being said, personally, I think, you know, I'm a little bit interested to see if in normal markets, this trade deal that had just really been enacted right before COVID hit over in China at the end of 2019, I personally am really interested to see if that would be something that comes to fruition and is beneficial for a lot of US companies. I don't know the exact numbers, it was in the billions, but China was really, in order to end the trade war, they were being told that essentially they have to purchase an extreme amount of US made goods that is almost way beyond what they currently purchase. And so it's tough because I think with the pandemic, you know, a lot of these manufacturers that were really excited for that market. It's one of the largest markets in the world right now. And the demand is so strong for US products. And, you know, regardless of the political outcome in November, I really hope that the next the president understands that without a doubt, we need to make US product easier to enter into China. We need to increase the demand over there and really start shifting like we've been needing to do for the past 20 years, in my opinion. We need to start shifting the amount we import from overseas, everywhere, and really increasing the amount of exports out of the US. And I think that will really strengthen us as a nation.
Yes, indeed. Something actually we tell new to exporters in particular, there is such demand for high quality US made products abroad. And
yes.
And it, you know, it helps to amortize shocks and on. And so yeah, I think that's a good good recommendation. Okay, on to a different topic. If I can open my Q&A here, we're getting little problems. Okay, could you comment on the usage of FTZs during this time? So free trade, foreign trade zones.
Sure. I think that they're extremely beneficial when you're shipping air. We had run into a couple issues where we had to utilize them while we were kind of awaiting particular clearance. So if things were getting FDA cleared and the FDA was so behind, and I'm talking about products outside of PPE, but just normal products that have to go through things like FDA clearance, you know, we found that sometimes the product needed almost a month for FDA clearance on particular commodity codes. And so we found that that was a really good tool to use. I also think overseas is a really important aspect as well. I would always say, talk with your freight forwarder and NVOCC about the usage of them for your specific commodity and your trade lane. It's very specific to particular commodities and particular supply chains. Not everybody needs to use them. But I do think that they're there for a reason. And I think it's really important to kind of utilize as many tools as you can. And that's definitely one of them.
Great, thank you. And shameless plug, the World Trade Center actually manages the foreign trade zone here in the area locally. So if you do have questions, we ask that you direct those to our FDI director, Sean Mullins, and we can provide some information on that as well. Okay, question from Amanda. There have been many recent announcements on collaborations and acquisitions that will help facilitate and fund COV and other surge-related improvements. How will the investors' countries of origin affect transparency and baseline rate as well as surcharges, specifically American Patriot Holdings?
I love this question. I love it. I literally just told Stella and Tim, right before this, I was just talking with the CEO of APH. I am extremely excited about this. I've always been a huge advocate of global trade, but an even bigger advocate of Midwest trade overseas. And I think one of the things that's kind of hindering Midwest trade with the world is just our geographic footprint of where we're located in this country and the ease, both with time and cost, to export or import your products on containers. And so for anybody that doesn't know, American Patriot Holdings is a really exciting company that is comprised of some industry experts in maritime, and they, you know, used all of their years of experience, and years ago they developed APH, and their whole idea is to essentially take trade on the Mississippi River, not getting rid of barge, but offering a supplementary service for containerized freight. Typically, the majority of barge traffic tends to be from the agriculture industry. And so a lot of the other commodities that ship, unfortunately, when they get loaded into containers, they have to travel both East Coast, West Coast, or South to a port of export on the rail. And as I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, you know, there's a lot of unforeseen delays with rail. Rail is a great cost-effective mode, but it's always good to have options. I always think, you know, if I owned a company and was selling widgets overseas, I would want to be able to compare the time and cost of shipping our container from St. Louis through a new container on vessel is what they're building. A container on vessel that would then go from St. Louis on the Mississippi River to a port right south of New Orleans, over shipping it from the rail terminal in St. Louis out to, let's say, the West Coast to then load upon an ocean-going vessel. So I definitely think it's going to be an incredible impact, a positive impact. Not to say that it's going to happen overnight. Right now, the latest news that came out and what is being discussed is really trying to hit a start point of 2023. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration. I mean, that logistics relationship slide that I showed you at the end, every single one of those aspects have to be connected and really pulled in to make an effort like this happen. And so I know that really, I think right now, container on vessel is a mode that's really needed. I can foresee, I wish it was here now, to be honest with you. And yeah, I mean, I definitely say, like, make sure that you've pinged your, Google search to notify you on any press releases that come out on container on vessel. I know that St. Louis Freightway is really, really highly involved in making sure that this effort is happening in the St. Louis region and for Missouri. So I would just say follow the news. I definitely think in terms of how will investors' countries of origin affect the baseline rate and surcharges. That's interesting. I will tell you one thing that is not really publicly discussed yet on container on vessel is the rateability factor. Stay tuned for it. Obviously, it's going to be discussed. I know that it's being discussed right now with the parties, but I just know, they're really working out all of those details. I love the gentlemen at APH because they're so open to collaboration with BCOs. And so if you have any input for them or any sort of advice just coming from the BCO, I can tell you without a doubt they would open it with they would open up that conversation with you and really try to kind of make sure that this whole entire mode of transportation is built around benefiting the BCO, which I can tell you that's what their mission is. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. As you mentioned the Midwest and the Freightway in particular, I did want to ask you, how is the Midwest in particular being affected by the current crisis?
Oh gosh, so I kind of gave an example of our customer that, his container was supposed to be here 4 weeks ago, and he had this extreme delay, especially because of the congestion at the Port of LA. It's a lot of times now at some of these major ports, the amount of time it takes to offload your container, that's being delayed. But then also, the issues with the chassis, the truckers getting it, the issues with the repositioning of the container off the vessel onto the rail, that's where we're seeing a ton of delay. And so I think really in terms of ocean freight, that's being the most effective. In terms of air freight, now it's gotten a lot better. I will say in early 2020, what was very difficult is the few flights out of China a week. And this goes for a lot of other countries too, not just China, but a lot of flights out of each foreign country per week were to your top largest airports, usually, JFK, LAX, Chicago, Miami, and maybe Dallas. And so it ended up that we were seeing that, importers and or exporters, because it kind of went the same way. I mean, as you saw, I know that the St. Louis airport had to reduce their amount of outgoing flights as well. But what you're seeing is now the products are having to be trucked farther to meet those destination or origin airports, which just adds to the cost and the time too. So I would say, that's kind of the biggest, just again, it goes back to just where we're located in the country and why I fully support the container on vessel as a way to sort of innovate how we solve that problem.
Great, thanks. So just following up on your, you mentioned innovation, and I know in our discussions prior to the event, we talked about an exciting project that you're working on and technology and how you're embracing that with global logistics. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So I guess it was about 2018. I kind of felt like Goldilocks, where I had tried out a lot of different logistics software, and I just couldn't find the right one. And what we were looking for was truly, a technology that expedites what a freight forwarder has to do and reduces the manual data entry, but really more so is an extremely helpful tool to keep the end customer completely transparent with everything we're doing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so, I really sat down and started building this in 2018. And so we've just started construction of a software called FreightLeap. And so what FreightLeap is going to do is really simplify global logistics for the end customer, as well as simplify internal procedures with the freight forwarder. It's going to drive compliance, drive communication, and really be built with some of the cutting edge technology and AI that is going to be able to help increase predictive analysis and really help both the freight forwarder as well as their customer to the planning. And so we're excited. We're actually going to be rolling out here in the next week. We finished our online quote tool. One of the things that just killed me was that usually in freight forwarding, it has been this way. Technology is getting a little bit better. But usually just to get a simple quote for global freight, it might take anywhere from, 5 emails to that take up a total of, 6 hours or so just to get a simple rate. And a lot of it is because, the shipper or the importer or the exporter says, I need this rate. And the data that we need to give them an all-inclusive rate that's accurate, we might only get this much of the data in the first initial email. So this was my thought behind this quote tool, is I said, how can we build something where in simple steps, in 8 simple steps, they can input all the data that a freight forwarder needs and immediately send that to the freight forwarder and turn around a quote within an hour or less. And then the next phase of it eventually is going to be adding in data and rates so that you can now switch to instantaneous quotations. A lot of the times we've seen importers and exporters that they need these rates on the fly. It takes a lot of technique and strategy from a freight forwarder to really hedge the market a little bit, to give, if essentially a freight forwarder is relying on overseas partners to provide their rates due to this time zone, you might not get that overnight. Whereas I look at things and I think, we're at a point now with data and technology that we feel pretty confident you can hedge the spot market, and then therefore really increase the reliability of the rate and then also the turnaround time of it. So we're excited to kind of really take on this journey of seeing what technology can do and the effect that it can have on it. And we're really looking for partners, a lot of importers and exporters that want to collaborate with us, so that this isn't just a software built by a freight forwarder, but a software built by a freight forwarder for a BCO or for an importer and exporter.
Well, Caitlin, I feel like we could ask you, tens more questions and go on for hours here. That's very exciting stuff, and I think something we can all relate to in terms of having to embrace technology, particularly in 2020. But it seems like you're taking it to the next level. So,
yes,
congratulations on that.
Thank you. And I'm actually typing out my email now in the chat box for anybody that has, any follow-up questions or you want to connect on anything. And I'm really grateful for everyone into this, and we're really grateful for the World Trade Center for doing these types of webinars, not letting social distancing get in the way of education.
Thank you so much. And again, to Caitlin's point, if you do have any questions, if anything comes to mind, over the weekend or next week, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will provide you with a copy of the recording as well. But if there are any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You'll find us on social media and through our website, etc. as well. And thanks again, Caitlin. I will just hand it over to Tim for the final word.
Thanks, Stella, and thank you, Caitlin. You truly are bringing transition and innovation to the industry, and we appreciate it. And we're so proud of what you're doing. Speaking of transition, if you get a chance, if you haven't already, on our website homepage, Globalization and Transition, the entire program of Growing Global that we hosted a couple of weeks ago. I think you'll enjoy watching that. It's an hour long and it's a great program. And so enjoy that. Thanks again, Caitlin. Thank you, Stella, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.